we thank you for joining us. Today is our special guest. We've got Michael Stebbins, who was actually helped to form Market Motive, is kind of the CIO of Simplilearn. He also has a lot of a background in the online training, helped to create a lot of the curriculum, and has just kind of been around, Mike, for what, about 15 years now, at least doing a lot of these parts with online marketing, and you have a obviously very background with other businesses as well. We're talking a little about today with Fired, Hired, and the new digital team skills and structure. Mike's going to be walking us through a little bit of kind of what some of the online marketplace is working towards, kind of where he sees some of these trends are coming up, and as he's been working with the OMCP, kind of how some of the market trends are going. So he's going to be describing that. We will be making this recording available. That's going to be online with the Simplilearn as well as the Market Motive websites, so that you can watch this or share this with any of your team members. We're going to be sharing a poll later on that if we can help you in any way with some of your business, if you find this very helpful and you're saying, hey, you know what, my team could use some of this information, or hey, I'd like to know a little bit more about what Michael does, or maybe some questions that maybe come up at a later point, you can reach back out to us. We will definitely make those available. But our job with Simplilearn is that we are here to help educate you and help you educate your team. So we put up these free webinars to help give you a little snippet of some of our faculty, some of our staff that have some teaching background, that we want to make this available. If you have any questions at any time, feel free to put that into the chat window or the questions box, and we will do our best to get through as many of those questions as possible before we run out of time. Also, if you do have any issues, you can raise your hand and I can try to reach out to you privately while Michael is doing some of his presentation. We do ask that if you want to go live and actually want to speak to Michael later on in some of the Q&A session, that we can make that available. So if you have your microphone on, just let me know if you ask a question. If you'd like to go live, we can definitely bring you on and you can chat directly with Mike. But if you do have that, please ask us to bring your cell phones and so on into the mute category so it doesn't disturb that. So with there, Mike, let me turn it on over to you and let you go ahead and talk to everyone.
All right, thanks, Matt. You know, in the last few weeks, you actually know, Matt, that we sent in over 14,000 of our family photos and had them scanned by a company called GoPhoto. It's part of Scan Photo, and this weekend was the first time family members and folks close to us were able to look at some of those photos. And you know, some of those 30-year-old photos are kind of embarrassing. And I told the kids and the people who were laughing at my 1985 style, hey, if people aren't laughing at your 30-year-old photo style, then you probably weren't trying hard enough. So,
I haven't seen the 30-year-old ones, Mike. I've seen some of the ones from the mid-90s, but yeah.
Let's just say the word mullet was being passed around. I deny it all. But you know, as we look back at our teams, oftentimes we can sometimes be embarrassed about how we set them up. So a mid-sized company years ago used to sequester the online marketing manager off to one side of the organization. And Jessica Bowman of SEO In-House put out a great report that showed that in the first 10 to 12 months that a internet marketer is hired at a company, 80% of their time is spent practicing their specialty. But after 10 to 12 months, 80% of their time is spent trying to influence the rest of the company into compliance or cooperation. And it's really sad that that type of influence has to happen. And so this siloing is something that's old and that we have to get rid of. And in some ways, it was even worse at the larger companies because we would segregate people into their single discipline. And earlier I was talking about the one-trick pony. There just is no longer a one-trick pony. The role delineation study from the Industry Association, OMCP, points out that managers, you and I and the people attending, insist that they must hire people who have two specialties now in terms of a level 3 practitioner, and I'll explain what that is for those of you who aren't familiar with the OMCP standard that Simplilearn and Market Motive teach to, but they want them to have proficiency in 2 disciplines at level 3 practitioner, and then they want them to have 5 of the 8 disciplines in an associate level understanding or definitional, if we're going to make up words, understanding of each of those disciplines, 5 of the 8. So these structures no longer work, and what I'd really like you to do is to view the skill sets that your teams need that can make or break your team over the next few years into these 3 areas, these 3 categories on your obligatory Venn diagram here. And the creative persuasive is what most people associate with digital marketing. Strategic and product over on the left is very typical, but the ops and data area is a new area where we're seeing a lot of attention. So let's put a few examples up where we see product marketing, the setting of business goals, the setting of revenue goals, even of margin being strategic and product oriented, and we see the typical association of the product strategy and the product marketing to the more creative. So up top here, let's see if we can highlight a little bit, we see branding, PR, social media, content marketing, more of the creative, whereas we see down here on the lower side, web analytics, data collection, and data management platforms is a little bit more of the ops and data, and these are the areas where we're seeing a lot more growth. So where are the hot new areas that we promised we would be telling you about? Well, interestingly, they tend to grow. Let's see if I can get control here again of the screen. Give keyboard and mouse. All right, Matt, I'm actually stuck. Normal drawing mode. There we go. Okay, we're back on track. All right, so the new areas where we're seeing most of the activity is where ops data is pushing into the creative and persuasive. So when ops and data and the new data that we're able to collect, whether it's implicit or explicit customer behavior data, is now being able to automate the creative and persuasive for the entire customer experience. So from advertising all the way to the purchase and all the way to the support to create a user experience like none other that makes us competitive. So these are the areas that managers are looking for the hottest skills, and here are some examples of what those are. So we might look at social selling, customer delight teams are popping up everywhere now, marketing automation is expanding, and we have a lot of programmatic advertising going on driven by the behavior data, either on-site or off-site, tag management and DevOps, and then of course big data and data science are necessary to be able to drive these types of decisions in these systems that can push. And it's very tough to find these kind of people out there who already have these skill sets, so we have a gap. So not only do we need the focus on the traditional, and then in the middle column here, the core, but now we add to that the complexity of the new skills, and when we're talking to candidates, we might present them with the landscape or the types of technologies that we need to understand. It becomes overwhelming. So Scott Brinker put out a great landscape of some of the MarTech technologies out there and categorized them, and it's pretty overwhelming over at Chief MarTech.
That's busy.
Yep. So we'll show this to a prospective candidate in addition to the other skills that they need, and typically the reaction is one of just being completely overwhelmed. These skills are skills that people need to bring up in time. So what do we do as hiring managers to hire for these skills and build them in our team? Well, so far what we've seen work really well is to focus on the core areas and then look for the soft skills that will lend themselves to people being able to train into these new data-centric skill sets that we need on our team. So this next slide is one that you may want to capture. This is a report that we've been doing quarterly since about 2012. And this shows what we as managers are asking for in aggregate in terms of the rate of appearance of skill set words or related words across hundreds of thousands of full-time marketing jobs. So these are looking for keyword indicators of demand skills in full-time marketing job postings on Simply Hired, LinkedIn, Indeed, and probably several others. So for example, this top area here would indicate that more than half of the jobs posted, the full-time marketing jobs, require social media skills, whereas about 10%, was that like 1 in every 11 or so, requires SEO skills, and so on down the list. So the interesting changes here are that MarTech and Marketing Ops just made the top 10 for the first time in Q2 of 2016, displacing conversion and persuasion off the top 10 list. Now, right away, somebody might say, well, does that mean conversion and persuasion are less important than MarTech and Marketing Ops? It's not necessarily the case. Oftentimes, things move off the list because they're perceived as required. It's sort of expected. For example, you wouldn't see the ability to operate a PC on the list because it's just expected, right? You wouldn't see the ability to type on the list because that's expected. So that's one reason things might be pushed off the list, or the other is a possibility that they might actually be less expensive, or excuse me, less time-consuming or less important. All right. So looking at this list, these are the core areas that managers are posting in jobs. Things change a little bit when we go out and poll managers. So let's take this down to the top 7 here off that report. So the top 7 skills in demand, and these, again, focus on the core areas that we pointed out before, but they really don't seem to address, as I mentioned, the skill sets that we need for data-driven and the new MarTech skills that our teams need to succeed right now. So when we go out and survey managers, and over 300 managers were surveyed who had leading teams, we asked, what is the time priority of these hard skills in terms of an average work week for your team? And the results came out quite different. In this case, social media, which was number 1, and remember that was in the majority of the job postings, moves down to number 5, and web analytics moves up to number 1. Conversion, which didn't make the top 7 or even the top 10, now moves up to number 3. So why the difference? Why is there this difference between what polled managers will tell us as a time priority and what's in the job postings? Well, there's 2 theories that we're seeing float around. We don't know which one is proven yet. Theory 1 is that these things just take more time. Web analytics takes much more time. And Matt, I know that you practice web analytics, and it is time consuming to be able to put together dashboards and reports and make meaningful decisions. That would imply that social media takes less time, which I don't know if I would argue for that. So that's one theory. The other is that we know that we can hire for social media, and it's much harder to hire for web analytics. And so oftentimes we hire people who are familiar with digital marketing, and then we put them into training programs so they can practice what we really need. That's another theory that's out there as well, and that process seems to be working pretty well for folks. Now things get even more interesting when we sit down and talk to managers, and in this case we interviewed 33 managers of teams that we considered to be exemplary, teams that were leading the market in terms of performance, in terms of innovation. And we asked those managers, which hard skills are required for your team to succeed and hit next year's goals? That single question. Which hard skills are required for your team to hit their numbers and succeed with next year's goals? And the answers were quite frustrating because the number 1 hard skill, the managers would say, I want somebody with the ability to persuade. And as the interviewer, this would be quite frustrating. We would say, that's nice, but it's not a hard skill. And we would repeat the question, which hard skills do you need for your teams to succeed? And the manager would come back, well, okay, fine, I'll give up the ability to persuade. We need the ability for people to take large amounts of data and make key decisions. Again, this is not a hard skill. Give me a hard skill. So they'd say, okay, how about writing skills? Well, arguably hard skills could be applied to writing skills, but generally it's considered to be a soft skill. And then they would throw out something like traditional marketing, which you saw that was on the left side of the Venn diagram. Those things in which have been with us for product marketing and product management for quite some time. People skills, again, a soft skill. So what was happening here is when we interviewed the managers, we started seeing the trend that they would hire for soft skills, and then they would train people in the hard skills that were necessary. A very interesting approach. So with that in mind, and if you choose to take that approach, I'm going to give you a couple of different techniques in order to assess the soft skills that might help drive people into these new skill sets that are required, and as well as the ability to assess some of the hard skills that are required for the team. So what we're going to do is view these things in 2 different groups. There's the top 3 here, innovation thinking, and the types of behaviors and passions that drive people to do what they do, and then the hard skills on the lower side there. Typically, these soft skills are very difficult to train. It is possible to develop them. Sometimes a good manager can do that. Oftentimes we see them grow with experience. Sometimes they're intrinsic in somebody's character and just who they are. But the good news is that certain soft skills can indicate a path to the missing hard skills that we want to hire for. And there are a number of managers who are doing a great job of that, and we'll share some of their techniques. Now let's talk about the hard skills. The first thing to do when you're assessing hard skills for a team or for a candidate is to categorize them into a taxonomy. What level of skills do we need? All right. So this particular taxonomy is one that's used by Simplilearn and OMCP and a lot of the industry, where we have entry level. So entry level in terms of digital marketing skills might be the ability to tell the difference between the disciplines and to articulate the difference between the disciplines. And I like to say, at a cocktail party. You're at a cocktail party. Could you explain to somebody the difference between paid search and natural search? Could you explain to somebody the difference between web analytics and conversion rate optimization? Level 1 is really not something that we teach to. Usually that's something people can pick up with just a conversation and a little bit of research. Level 2 we call conversant. Level 2 is where somebody is able to articulate the component level definitions in each of the disciplines. So a couple of examples. In web analytics, somebody might be able to articulate why segmentation needs to be done, or what are the pieces of a key performance indicator, that it's ratio-based. They might be able to articulate the difference between the natural, the on-page optimization in SEO versus the off-page search engine optimization. They might be able to differentiate search between the search network and the display network. So these are the components of each of the disciplines at a associate or articulate level. And this is appropriate for people who will manage digital marketers or hire agencies, for somebody who may sell or hire in the digital marketing realm. And I see a typo there where that comma should be 1 over. I'll fix that later. The practitioner level is one of the most popular. Practitioner is where somebody hangs out a shingle and says, I am a conversion rate optimization specialist. I am a web analytics specialist. This is where somebody could build themselves out at a consultant level or execute within a company with minimal supervision. And it just so happens that these map to the online marketing certified associate level and the online certified professional level, which leads me to 4, master level. This is somebody who is considered an expert and teaches at conferences, sets the standard, creates new processes, or identifies new areas that the company or team can start processing in. So the first step is, when you're hiring for known hard skills in the core area, is map them to a certain proficiency level. Now, how can we efficiently figure out what level somebody is? Well, typically levels 3 and 4, practitioner and master, are so proficient at their task that they tend to share it with others. So a great pre-screening method, before we even take the time to interview, is to have somebody tell us if they've presented papers, talks at conferences, forums, and blog posts. In other words, have they shared their skill set? And this is a great pre-screening if we're looking for level 3 or level 4. Sometimes it's in the software that we're using to bring in candidates. Sometimes we can have somebody do a pre-screen. It's a great way to find out ahead of time. Typically, if somebody has not shared, I say typically, statistically, if people have not shared on forums or blog posts, then they are less likely to be a level 3 or level 4. It doesn't mean they're not. It just means that if you have high numbers and you need to go with the statistical outcomes, that's a great way to do pre-screening. All right. Once somebody's in for the interview, folks say, well, how do we figure out what their hard skills are? And I'll start from the bottom here. A great question to ask is, who do you follow? Who do you follow on Twitter? Who do you follow in terms of somebody who teaches the skill that you need to use in the role that we're hiring for? So do you follow Brian Eisenberg? Or do you follow Jennifer Cario? Do you follow Avinash Kaushik? And if they do, it's likely that they're investing at the conversant or practitioner level. Have you completed a book? Not just browsed a book. Have you completed a book? Which ones? Books that are reputable. Have you completed Brad Getty's Advanced AdWords book? Well, then it's likely that you've invested in level 3 practitioner skill set. A lot of folks claim certifications or that they took courses. A good thing to do is ask in advance for a syllabus for that course. What was covered? I can't tell you how many people have come claiming to know SEO. Well, I'm certified, I took a course. Great, what course did you take? Well, there's this one on Udemy. Okay, send me the syllabus, send me the link. And we go there, and it's a great course 4 years ago by somebody who was only focused on on-page optimization. Okay, so 4-year-old on-page optimization techniques might be useful, but it did not cover keyword research, it did not cover reporting, all required pieces of SEO. All right, so when we go and look at the syllabus, this tells us how thorough somebody's training might have been. And then lastly, if there's an industry association that you trust that has a complete competency, if somebody has a course or certificate, you can rely on that by looking at what is covered or required. And it's really important here to differentiate between tool certifications and process certifications. So Matt, I know that you're project management certified, and that was a process-oriented certification that took a lot of study and a lot of time. It wasn't tied to some tool. Now, tool certifications can be valuable. It's great to know where to click in HubSpot, and it's great to know where to click inside of Google AdWords. Those are very valuable if you're going to be using those tools. But I do recommend that if you're assessing somebody's hard skills, you look at which certifications are process-oriented that cover how they're supposed to behave and what they're supposed to do for success in that role. Now, I'm going to get into assessment training, and this is a hot topic. Some people don't like to do assessments. Hardly anybody likes to go through them. When we do assessments, it's really easy to make the interview go south. So in the next screen, I'm going to share a couple of specific assessment examples that we use to look at hard skills in digital marketing. But these will keep you on track. So if you're going to do a snapshot of the screen, now would be the time to do that. Any assessment that you give your candidate should be undisputed by 3 out of 4 experts who are already practicing in that area. If more than that dispute, if more than 1 out of 4 disputes it, then it's really not a fair assessment for your candidate. So check, if you have an assessment, make sure it's authoritative and reveals what the learning is. Number 2, we used to do assessments here at Market Motive that took sometimes half an hour, and that was a mistake. We learned very quickly that some candidates would just blow out, get frustrated, and think that's what it was all about. Some people might even accuse you of doing, getting free consulting from them, and so you want to be careful and just keep it short and sweet. And then the other mistake that I've seen quite a few times in assessment testing is that it's some way of trying to figure out if somebody has inside knowledge of the company, which is just not fair. We always allow somebody to choose whichever company they may model. And so you'll see that, for example, we may say, show us a conversion funnel for our company or another company that you choose or might know. So all 3 of those are rules for assessments that if you stick to those, you'll likely be able to make it through with candidates who are happy and engaged in the process. All right, here are a few assessment examples that we put out for people. You might be able to guess which category each one of these are in. Name 3 KPIs for a company that you choose. Our company, or let's say Reebok shoes, or you can pick anything that you're comfortable with. What are Apple's KPIs likely to be? And this is a great exercise for somebody to go through. Build an initial keyword list for our company or for a store that's going to sell pretzel benders, right? Name top 5 implicit data that you'd put in a data management platform. If somebody's going to be handling a data management platform from you, they should need to understand explicit and implicit data. One of my favorites is pick a topic you're passionate about and write 2 to 3 paragraphs. And then instead of letting them do this inside of Microsoft Word or something, we give them WordPad, which has no spell correction and no grammar correction. And it's amazing to see, for myself as well, right? It's difficult. We get dependent on these things. But if somebody is truly a writer, they should be able to write 2 to 3 well-structured paragraphs without a lot of outside help. I love this one. 40% of incoming links have an anchor text of learn more. What would you do? And if this is the reaction that you get to any of these, we're in some serious trouble, because it's unlikely that these people have the hard skills, and assessments can really. Assessments for soft skills get a little bit more interesting. So Google, I'll tell you a little story. Google used to be famous for asking problem-solving questions during their interviews, and they stopped doing that. A lot of people assumed that it was because of legal issues or because they were getting skewered on sites like Glassdoor for asking tough problem-solving questions, but the truth is that Google discovered, or reported later, that they did not see a correlation between the performance in these assessment questions and the behavior and performance once the person was hired. So that is an argument against thinking assessment trainings and problem-solving tests. Now, I argue, because my experience has been quite different, and so have a lot of the managers that I've worked with, is that Google was mostly hiring engineers, and they have other stringent tests and exams for engineering that are more tied to the performance of somebody who's coding than a problem-solving test. So you decide whether these kinds of questions will make sense. Again, we go back to the 3 rules. You want to make sure that these things are not disputed, they're solvable in very short time, and no insider facts are required. But these types of questions that we've asked here, I'll give an example of what we do, and Rand, actually I love Rand's, draw what our conversion funnel would be. It's a great question. Here at Market Motive, John Marshall and I picked up something from Joel Spusky where the question is, how many curly telephone cords would you sell in Santa Cruz? And we do require the candidate to get to an answer, but we're really not concerned with the answer. What we're concerned about are the things over here in this winner category. Do we have a can-do approach? Is there depth and capacity? We like to say, for example, for the MarTech type roles that we're hiring for, looking for right now, and that most managers are eager to find, data-driven roles, is there the depth and capacity? How many chess moves can one keep in their head at the same time? Is there capacity for multiple component problems, something that could be applied to learning these hard skills over time as they develop? One of my favorite things, if a candidate is in the midst of an interview and problem solving and they use words like for instance or let's say that, to me that shows the ability to plug in temporary variables and model for a solution. And that's a great way to show that somebody's not afraid of failure, not afraid of a few bumps, and they're willing to drive to a solution using temporary variables. It's a great sign. And then the last key that we love to see are ratios and sampling. Well, let's say that we stood outside of Costco and we surveyed people and found out how many had curly phone cords, and then we could apply that to the population of Santa Cruz County. Any kind of ratio and sampling thinking is definitely going to lend well to these new hot skills that we're trying to hire for. So these are great ways, if you follow those 3 rules, these are great ways to look at the depth and the capacity that somebody has, the ability to think and hold a problem solving all the way to the end. Matt, we've had candidates who have gone through this and done great, and then minutes from the finish line just blew out and said, I can't take it anymore, I'm done. And
Michael, walk us through.
We wanted them to win, you know.
Why don't you just I wanted a little bit of a humor to it. I know you've shared this story with me, but the one where you, I think it was actually the cell in the telephone cords. Walk through kind of what that scenario was and maybe some of the soft skills that you were looking for and see how they approached it and what did that mean to you?
Well, some of the winners, as I mentioned before, have been people who talked about sampling, and so some of the winners that we've seen have said, well, let's see, let's assume that the population of Santa Cruz is 150,000, let's round it to 200,000 to make the math easy. To me, that's a good sign, right? They don't really care about the explicit number, but they're going to go ahead and work their ratios, so that's a good one. Mm-hmm. The second one was the sampling. I'll stand outside of Costco and sample people walking out. And then the idea that somebody, the last one is that when somebody puts out a number and they finally get to a number, which by the way, it's usually less than like 20 because people don't buy curly phone cords that often. They just replace the phone or use a cell phone. Is that when they arrive at a number and you challenge that number, that they're willing to work their way back through their ratios and adjust as necessary. And so those are all great signs. But Matt, I think you're remembering there was one situation where there was a PhD candidate, and he didn't realize that he was the only candidate that we had interviewed. And he was just really irritated by this question. And this goes to show where you have to be really careful with these things. And he actually called me later to dispute the question and the answer. He was very angry about this. He ended up posting on Glassdoor under an anonymous name, and we called him and said, look, we know you're upset, but he posted some things about market motive saying it was like a college dorm room, which, by the way, at that time was true. But he revealed some other things about our numbers and revenue that weren't quite right, so he was kind enough to take it down. So you just have to be careful how you treat people as they go through these things. So a lot of folks like to say, well, how can we figure out people's work habits and passions? And this goes back, this is a little bit detached from digital marketing. It's just good practice, right? I like to see people follow a method taught by a man named Del Still. It's a great book there at the bottom of the slide, High Impact Hiring, How to Interview and Select Outstanding Employees. And Del taught this method of taking the work habits or passions that you want in a candidate and narrowing it down to 3 to 5 cards, or 3 to 5. We actually used cards. We'd sort through them and prioritize them. 3 to 5 work habits or passions or behaviors that you want. And then you ask the question, tell me about a specific time when you did these things. Now that question has become a little bit of a stigma in some cases because it's deeply frustrating to candidates who don't have these. Now let's take one of these for an example. Tell me about a time when you influenced another team for SEO compliance. Now, what most candidates will do, just slightly over the majority, or slightly over half, they will generalize. And they will start to say, well, SEO is important. It's important to get other teams on board. Thank you for that. I agree. However, I'm asking for a specific instance where you influenced another team for SEO. What was the situation? What were the actions you took? And what were the results? And again, people will wander and generalize, and you have to pull them back, interrupt, and say, look, I really need you to think of a specific situation. Make up a name. You don't have to tell me the name, but you use a name of somebody that you interacted with if that helps. Now, if somebody really gets frustrated, we pull a, don't worry about that. We'll come back to that later. But I can tell you that if your candidate cannot name a situation where they exhibited these work habits or behaviors, it is highly unlikely that they actually have them. Okay, and so this can be a grueling part of the interview, but it is absolutely essential to find out if people really can do these things and have done them in the past. When did you direct a new MarTech stack? When have you exhibited planning and scheduling that worked well for your organization? And make sure and keep them to specifics. Okay, almost winding up here on time, but the most common question that I'm getting from managers who are working with us right now is, Mike, should we hire inexperienced people and train them, or should we hire experienced people who can hit the ground running? And it's a great question, and I've put some of the things that I think correlate with each approach, okay? The first is, if you're hiring inexperienced folks, it is more of an emphasis up here on the soft skills, an assessment of the soft skills, because it's highly unlikely that they're going to have the level 3 hard skills and the broad level 2 skills that are required to get the job. So this is definitely a hire and train situation. You get youthful innovation and energy in the company, all right, but you really have to, where your pay happens, right, where you do end up having to pay, is to make sure you retain these people after you've invested in them, and that you keep a culture that is attractive for them to stick around. All right. The benefit is that you can shape these people, provided you can retain them, to the needs of the company. And it turns out that there are some statistics out there that show that when you train your people, they do tend to stick around, because that's considered one of the benefits of the company. It's just like good health benefits or having people in company lunches. These kind of things are ways that people feel like they're plugged in. Now, on the other side, you'll notice that the shape is slightly different here. So now for experienced folks, there's much more of a focus on the level 3 hard skills and level 2 hard skills, and we're going to assume that the soft skills are developed as they're going to get. Now, it's tougher to recruit, it's more expensive. If you have a team with deep structure already established, then you can focus on specialists to come in. And what's good is that if you have experts in place, they can hire and guide entry-level resources, a little bit of in-house training, although sometimes it's tough to get your best folks taking time off to train when there are courses available, so that's something that you need to decide on your own. If your company has very specific intellectual property and processes inside, then this can work. If it's doing digital marketing and it's on the bleeding front and wants to stay up to date, then it might make sense to have outside classes. The good news here on hire and experience is that mature incoming candidates are more likely to be better at representing the company, where that can be a trouble over here on the inexperienced side. But then again, on the inexperienced side, there's a communication methodology and ability that we have in our incoming younger recruits that they can relate to their market much better. So those are some of the components that help us decide whether we're hiring inexperienced and training up, or hiring experienced and just paying the cost for having them in. All right, interns. We get asked quite a bit about interns and making use of them. There's a couple of guidelines beyond the norm here that I'd like to share with you. First off, interns can provide incredible resources and energy in your company. They can get a lot of great work done. But you really do have to be generous, and this is important. Every intern should have a sponsor at the company, or somebody who is advocating for them or watching out for them. And so for the interns that I got to sponsor here at Market Motive and Simplilearn, I would simply ask, what do you want out of this? But I'd have to ask 3 times, because the first time they would read off the card, if you will, that their professor told them. So I'd say, what do you want to get out of this? You're coming into the leading digital marketing training company, and it's really exciting. There's a lot of it. What do you want out of this? And they would say, I want to make the world a better place because I'm building my skills for future graduates. And it's like, okay, great. I know your professor told you to say that. What do you really want out of this? And it's like the diligent ones would read the card again. But usually the third time that you would ask, they would blurt out, I want to open an e-commerce store that sells textbooks and make a ton of money, or I want to get a career in analysis and move my way into finance. And what we would do is, once we could really find out what they wanted, is that we'd take it on ourselves to enable that. I had one intern come in and say, I just want to be a CEO, and I want to do what it takes. And so from then on, I made it my job to make sure to enable that within the ability that we could at the company. So for the one who wanted to open an e-commerce store, we carved out a section on our server, and we put up, I don't know, it was WooCommerce on WordPad or something like that, or WordPress. And we set them up with that so they could practice with it. Mm-hmm. For the one who wanted to be a CEO, and in some of our more intense meetings, we would invite him in, even if we were arguing. I would go and find him, and I'd say, Mitch, come on in. I think you got to see this. And we invited the interns to our lunch meetings where we did our company planning and reporting, and invited their input. And those things came back to benefit them and to benefit us, and I'll show you how in just a moment when I talk about recruiting. You don't want your interns to be the voice of the company. I think that goes without saying in a lot of situations, but we get asked that quite a bit. And make sure that at least 20% of their role is creative. Sure, you can make them go get coffee and do the junk work, that the tedious work, but give them something to brag about. Here at Market Motive, what we did is we said, hey, why don't you go ahead and do a contest for who can make the best display ads, and we'll test them on our display ad network and see which ones win. And a couple of them stuck. And now the intern can go back to their family or their friends or the professor and brag and say, hey, we're creating ads for the leading training institute in America, right, or in the world. Training, create templates to guide new interns. Interns coming in these days are super smart. They can do a lot on their own. A mistake would be to spend 2-3 days training them, with your valuable people offline. What we learned to do is just give them a task, and most of the time they'd rise to the task and only interrupt when they needed help. Each time you learn something new, we stuck it in a printed binder. Yep, actually printed. With little plastic sleeves, and we would hand that to the intern, and they come up to speed real quick. Now, in California, unpaid interns are allowed, but there are some real strict guidelines, and I really urge you to, if you're going to go that route, check the law and make sure that you're in compliance. It's basically come down to a point where it's almost not worth it to try and do it that way here in California, but your laws may vary from state to state. But if you stick to these, you should have great luck with interns, and then there's some benefits. So next we're going to cover a couple of things. These are typical sources for talent. typical ways that we can bring in talent, through your own social media, that's fine. You want to broadcast jobs and opportunities, and that makes sense. I really recommend LinkedIn Premium. The advanced people search is just phenomenal. You can find people who used to work in your area. If you're in an area like in the Silicon Valley and people want to come back, sometimes you can find people who used to work here. It is a great way. A lot of our talent comes in through this. Ask your proponents to broadcast on Facebook. This has become a tremendous resource for us. And guess who is perfectly willing to broadcast the job? Are your former interns who just love, love, love the company. Okay, if you go to them and say, hey, we've got a new job opening for this, would you be willing to broadcast it to your network? You've just amplified your broadcast of your jobs from people who love the company and are willing to be a proponent for it. So those are typical sources for talent. Let's look at a few that are sometimes overlooked. All right. Become an industry member of various associations like the DMA or the American Marketing Association or OMCP and scan their lists. In the member lists, you'd be perfectly within your rights to recruit off of those member lists. If you go to omcp.org and look down the list of people who have public profiles, and some portion of the certified have chosen to have public profiles, those are great people to reach out to. And then conference speaker lists. If you monitor the speaker list for good conferences like PubCon or SMX or ClickZ, and look for new speakers who just made it onto the list. Oftentimes these are up-and-coming people who, remember, if they're sharing their skill, are probably a level 3 or perhaps even a level 4, and that's a great way to recruit. Analogous departments at universities. This is a little secret that John Marshall and I used. If we needed marketing people, sometimes we would tap into the economics department. If we needed web analytics people, we tap into analytics. This is the ability to take large amounts of data and make decisions. Did you know that salespeople tend to make good paid search practitioners? Also, post a video of what it's like to work at your company. Sometimes your interns can put that together for you. And then here's one of my favorites. Invite a speaker to teach on a specific discipline where you'd like to recruit. Invite a speaker, and this is a physical presence thing, brick and mortar. Have them come into your town, rent out part of the Holiday Inn conference area, and put it in the newspapers, put it out on your social network that expert speaker such and such, published author, is going to speak on this particular topic in town. Fill the room. Those are your candidates. People should show up to listen to a speaker in the area that you want to hire. Those are your candidates. I've seen Simply Hired do this. Gotham invited Rand Fishkin of Moz to come down and speak on SEO. Packed out the room. I would say there was at least 150, 200 people in there. All of those people were recruited. All of those people were recruited to work for Gotham. It's a great way to go. All right, last thing I'll leave with you, and this is, some people call this Agile Employment. I just call it good sense. When we can match up these three areas, people's skill and passion, with their absolute contribution. A lot of times people's passion doesn't line up with what they're able to deliver. So let's say that somebody has a skill and passion able to deliver an SEO capability with what the company needs. Break the functional definition of jobs as you know it and put together a custom job for a candidate or somebody that you want to retain. All right. One example here is that we had somebody in PR who is also skilled, in fact I think she might be on this webinar, who is also skilled in digital media and video production, and we asked her to have a unique job shape of going out and doing the interviews of happy customers and corporate managers who had experienced great training through Simplilearn, and produce that as a compelling video and then go back and drive that through PR. And those types of job shapes can be phenomenal for making people feel like they're making a difference and stick around. So rewarding through pay and culture is good, but oftentimes just making somebody feel like they're firing on all cylinders makes all the difference for retention once you've trained up somebody in the hard skills that they need. So with that, Matt, that's what I have to share. There is a small gift here. If you want to type in that URL, there is a Digital Dream Team's book that was put together by Avinash Kaushik, Brian Eisenberg, Brad Geddes, Jennifer Cario, and Greg Jarboe, and a few others, that shows how to build, motivate, and manage digital marketing teams. So if you copy that URL, you can download your free copy of that. And with that, Matt, I'll turn it over to you. If there's any questions in the short time that I've left us, I'd be happy to try and answer those. Otherwise, we invite everybody to jump into Market Motive, and I think you might have a little survey to put up as well.
Yeah, let me go ahead and I'm going to put up the survey just so it's we can have that. All right, go here. All right, so for those that are just on the call, if you just want to go ahead and kind of read through some of those, see which one of those options is best, or I think you can actually pick multiple ones, see which ones select for you. But as I said, I want to talk about what we do, and Michael, I appreciate you spending some time. That's something that's often as a training company that gets overlooked of, how do you get the right type of skill? How do you get the right type of people involved there to make sure that we are getting good skill set? I know as a manager in training that I remember going through some of those parts, and we use something called behavioral interviewing, which was a similar methodology of, tell me a time when you did blah, 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 blah. And, based on the type of position you're interviewing for, you wanted to see how did they process through it. And your SAR was exactly what we did of, you wanted to find what's the situation, what's the actions, and what are the results. And I found that to be a very effective tool in my experience as to getting good quality people and how do they work, how do they get there. So I appreciate you explaining some of those. So we're going to go ahead and close. Well, here's what we do is we'll talk a little bit about what it is that we have. So for Simplilearn, a lot of the training that we have here is within there is the digital marketing side is through Market Motive, and they have a lot of different courses that are there that talks about the different skill sets, those hard skills that Michael was talking about, having to work on the different disciplines and the different parts. I am not as familiar on the Simplilearn side. I know there are some skills in there that are available to do some of the soft pieces, or maybe some of the other types of skills. But that's one of the things we want to know. If we can help you learn some of those parts, Simplilearn is continually developing new curriculum and finding new pieces. If there are ways that we can help you with that, let us know. Fill out some of the survey that we can help there, and we want to be able to reach out to you. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, since we've had enough time there. So, all right, there are some Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes left or so. So let me go ahead and, all right. So there is, so one of the questions that were asked is Ray from over in California had asked this one, is how do the best-in-class companies incent DM employees to invest some time in training the areas that they think that do not impact their job, such as SEO person taking social media marketing and kind of those cross areas?
You make it impact their job. So in implementation of training programs that include thousands of people, there's really two approaches that we've seen. That of voluntary, and that of it's a necessity to retain your job or certain benefits of the role. So obviously the retention rate, the completion rate is very high in the 90s if it relates to your role. I know that one group who was in publishing, who had about 3,000 people go through the training, basically said you cannot make a move laterally up or up at our company unless you have your OMCP certification. And so the completion rate was in the high 90s on that. Whereas companies who make it voluntary tend to have completion rates in the 30%. So it's really just a matter of how important it is to the managers that people finish to set up a motivation. Typically there are motivation methodologies that we've seen get it higher, such as public reward, when it's top down, when it comes from the C-level execs that this is important to the company, and people who finish the training in some manner, like highest score or soonest to complete or quickest to complete, get recognized by the senior management staff. That helps. Some go with competitive, which team ends up with the highest score within the deadline and completion rate, kind of like a golf challenge, has really helped when you have regional teams competing, because they are generally taking the same curriculum to come up to a known industry standard. That method has worked very well. There have been financial rewards. Sometimes there's public get-togethers you know, a little bit of an ice cream event where everybody's invited and there's certain gifts that are handed out. We have pictures of teams where they posted their certifications, they printed out the certifications and posted those up, and it became sort of a badge. And if you walked into a department and they had, say, you know, 50 or, you know, 100 certifications posted, oh, that was a big status thing. So those are a couple of methods. I know that the account managers at Simplilearn have worked with hundreds of teams and can share with you some great ways to motivate your teams to go through the training. So that's a great question. And Ray, let us know if that answered the question for you.
Yeah, one other follow-up piece to that, Mike. Do you think it's good that when you're having those individuals kind of cross-train in different parts, do you think it's good that they get a little bit of experience, they maybe see for 6 months or so, and then have them rotate to a different discipline to kind of get a little bit of each taste and see maybe what maybe they excel in a certain area? How do you see some of those things, or what do you think about that?
So, of course, it's a good thing if you're able to do it. There are some companies where the managers are so buried and so pressed for deadline that becomes a luxury. And it's just a reality. And then there are some groups where they press themselves to do this. So I would say at a digital marketing agency or any agency that's performing billable hours, that's a must-do.
Mm-hmm.
That's an investment because it increases the billable hours that one of your staff members can provide for the company. Inside of a in-house team, it certainly would bring benefit, but I have some sympathy for managers who aren't able to pull that off. So probably not the ideal answer that our folks were looking for out there, but that's just reality. I mean, sometimes it's just hard. Yeah, or as we used to say around here, sometimes the answer is, it's worse than you think. Mm-hmm. But it is a practice that I really recommend strongly for anybody who has billable hour services.
Okay. Just one of the questions I had, a couple comments actually came in regarding the social media. I think it was one of your earlier slides where I think it was 53% of the individuals looking for the job postings said social media was kind of their primary piece within there. Why do you see that as such a differentiator that, you know, social media, social media, social media? And obviously, you know, my wife, Jennifer, is the one who does the social media courses, so we are very heavily involved in that. So I have some of my snippets of why, but why do you see that as such a big piece that so many companies are looking for social media individuals as to compared to the other groups?
Sure, and you saw that it dropped down in terms of actual time and priority once we actually surveyed where the time and priority went. I think mostly that it's a buzzword and it's a little easier to hire for. Again, there's theory here, so this is not something we've gone and analyzed and got proof in. But oftentimes the algorithm for the initial report that we have, if it says LinkedIn in the job description, we're going to assume that they're looking for somebody to work on LinkedIn or Facebook or like. What we do is we differentiate advertising, though. So if it says Facebook advertising, the word advertising is in proximity, then we assume it's an advertising role. But if it lists a social media platform or network, we are going to assume that that role includes some type of communication with your audience, and we plug that into social media. So there could be a little bit of bias on the report there, but in general, if somebody lists those platforms, we put that into that category. And it is really the way that social media, going into a thin ice here, and I know that Jennifer would probably have much more authority on this, but the you know, the practice of communicating with your constituents, your audience, people who might buy or have bought your product, goes much beyond marketing. And so now these were full-time marketing job postings, so if they included that, then yes, you know, communication with your audience is just happening that much. We would hope even more than 52%.
Okay. What is a question that's from Daniel, from also in California, had asked the question of how do companies deal with selling multiple products that require the skills multiple marketing managers specialized in different channels?
Yeah, so it gets tough. Let's say that you have an enterprise product and then a consumer product, or let's say that you have a product range that covers different target markets. And so we've seen people slice their marketing teams in different ways. You can have product-centric marketing, you know, or you can have skill-centric marketing teams. And, you know, it's a touchy question. It's like Mac versus PC. You know,
You got to create an advertisement for that one too?
yeah, you have to be real careful. That's right. You have to be real careful how you slice your teams in that sense, or what you claim is best. Generally, I'll stick my neck out a little bit, I have seen category or product-specific marketing teams be slightly more successful because, again, product knowledge is something that's trained inside every company and brought up over time, whereas training for these specific hard skills is something that you can rely on training programs for. So I would much rather bring in a specialist in, you know, radio detection and train them in how to market, you know, via social media and via natural search and via the other channels in hard skills, instead of bringing in an SEO specialist and train them in radioactive detection. And so I have a slight bias towards product-centric multi-skill set than going in with an SEO who has to learn each of the products.
And I would kind of train off that. I think there could be an advantage if you have a large company that maybe you have your social media managers who's helping to set some guidelines or give some structure, or maybe is the response. But you know, there is that individual, like you said, those other skills that they can say, you know, they can use social media to post and discuss about, you know, the radiology information, but maybe it's not their everyday job. It's just a small segment of their job, so they can help be a part of it and be the authority, but not have to own the whole process.
Right. Exactly.
So,
yep.
Okay.
I think we're good. Well, I know we're coming up against time here.
Yep.
Matt, anything else that we should cover?
Just looking through, just one real quick question. I think this could be a good one that a lot of individuals might find is, how do you measure the ROI when you send your individuals or your staff through training? Do you have any idea of how you measure the ROI of, was it a valuable resource that we can measure against that can help to validate and show the CEOs or others to say, yeah, this was a good investment?
So that's another webinar.
All right, you get your 30-second answer, Mike.
Yeah, well, there are two schools out there, and they're both, I see they both have valid points. The first is that, and this is a bit of an idealistic approach, I have to confess, all right, but the people who do it are getting incredible results. When you start with competencies required for a role, and you teach to those competencies, and then you prove that people have completed component level training that relate to those, and then you measure that against their performance, okay? That shows a successful training program, all right? The competencies and job requirements for somebody to reach a specific goal are going to be related to skill sets. So let's say that your on-page optimization needs to do X, and your ranking needs to change, and therefore your qualified traffic changes. Then, therefore, somebody who is trained in on-page optimization techniques should relate to an increase in relevant traffic through natural search, okay? If you can map those things from the original competencies required for the job through the performance, then you have the ultimate ROI, I believe. Beyond that, other groups make a leap, just like we used to with television advertising or print advertising. When you do it, you correlate the results to the behavior, but it's a little less scientific, and it's a bit of a shot in the dark sometimes. So it's actually hard to do. I know that our sponsors wish that we could say that, oh yeah, there are very set systems, and it is proven for more scientific reports that the best ROI you can get is in training. But to be honest, it's a hard thing for managers to actually put it to something concrete because there are so many factors going on. Generally, teams who train perform better, okay? It's just, I don't think anybody questions that, but it's like jumping in a cold pool at first, you know? It's that initial jump is tough to do, but once you make the commitment, it works. I think the thing I really want to emphasize and leave everybody with is when the requirements for training start at the top. When the C-level exec team says, we are going to commit to this and stick to it, and we are going to hold our managers to this regardless of changes in priority, and regardless of deadlines, we will have a minimum training time of N hours per week, 3 to 5 hours per week per employee. And we will always hold that sacred until we complete this program. Those programs get the best results.
Okay.
And when they tie back to competencies, that's the biggest win.
I like it. Give someone to kind of walk away with and saying, what do we want to do with that? So.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate your time and taking taking time out of your busy day to talk to us and kind of get there. Again, this webinar will be available up on the Market Motive and the Simplilearn website that you can go through there. If you do want to get a copy of the slides, please email us and we will make sure those get to you. So, all right. And with that, I'll let everyone get through the rest of your day and go about your business. So, thank you.
Great. All right. Thanks, Matt.
Bye-bye.